I don't know about you, but I could use a break from animated movie rankings for a bit, so I figured I'd try my hands at ranking a director filmography instead. And when I made this decision, there was one director that almost immediately came to mind: Edgar Wright.
Edgar Wright is one of the more interesting directors out there. He might not be as big of a name as someone like Steven Spielberg and Christopher Nolan, or as beloved by film critics like Wes Anderson or Quentin Tarantino, but he still made some really solid films over the years. He doesn't have one super distinct style, but his movies do have some similar qualities, like flashy, fast-paced editing, cool action sequences, and absolutely top-notch visual humor, so it's not really surprising to see why his stuff is so beloved. He's even one of the few directors to not have a single negatively rated movie on Rotten Tomatoes. Well, kind of. We'll get into that in a sec. And while not all of them are big hits at the box office, many have gained huge followings over time. Hell, he personally directed one of my favorite movies ever, and I've heard nothing but high praise for most of his other works. So I figured it was finally time to sit down and go through all of his movies. Well, sort of. I'm not counting the Sparks Brothers, since that's a documentary, so I don't really find it comparable to his other stuff. And after seeing all of his stuff, it's not hard to see why he's so acclaimed, since the vast majority of his filmography is composed of absolute bangers. Even his weaker stuff still has a lot to appreciate, so doing this ranking has easily made him one of my new favorite directors.
I'm really excited to talk about most of these, so let's see how all of the films from this awesome British guy stack up against each other.
Boo! You stink!
I feel like it shouldn't be that much of a shock that Wright's first film is at the bottom of this list. Oh, what, you thought Shaun of the Dead was his first movie? Believe it or not? No, it isn't. That was just his first film with a studio behind it. His first real film was actually a low-budget western comedy called A Fistful of Fingers, a movie that premiered at only a single theater in 1995 and was never shown anywhere again until 20 years later as a midnight movie in California, and it has yet to be officially released on home media or streaming, so it's very likely that you haven't seen this movie, much less heard of it. I honestly debated whether or not to include it because of that, but it's listed on his Wikipedia article, Rotten Tomatoes, though there aren't enough critic ratings to give it a score, and it's on Letterboxd, so I guess it counts. And safe to say, yeah, I can kinda see why this doesn't get that much attention. Now again, A Fistful of Fingers was made on an extremely low budget, so in that regard, it does have some charm to it, but sadly, once you actually look past that, the movie's kinda boring. I can tell what they're going for, a super cheap comedy that's intentionally stupid, and mainly just an excuse to tell jokes, kinda like Monty Python and the Holy Grail if it was a western. But sadly, I don't think it does that very well. Granted, I haven't seen that many western movies, so that might play a part in it, but I mostly found this movie pretty uninteresting. Now, there are some good jokes in here. The horse falling off the cliff was great, the lady trying the gun in your pocket routine and him not even letting her finish it was funny, and the guy hanging with a sign that said, "Piss off," is hilarious. Plus, there were a decent amount of chuckles I had throughout the movie, but there's nowhere near as many jokes as something like Monty Python, so in between them, what you're left with is just a generic and intentionally cheap movie about a cowboy searching for a gunman, along with this Native American that may or may not be racist. I'm honestly not sure, and I don't feel qualified to make an assumption. Not helping is the fact that some of the jokes are just not very funny, mainly because a lot of them are way too slow or go on for too long, so it comes across as being awkward, which is super bizarre for something with Edgar Wright's name on it, since his movies are known for being really fast-paced. And again, that's when there actually are jokes in here. The majority of this movie just feels kinda aimless.
I feel kinda bad for picking on this movie, since they clearly did their best with what they could work with, and it seemed like everyone involved had a fun time making it, but unfortunately, I don't think it turned out too well.
Like I said earlier, it is neat that Edgar Wright got to start making something so simple, but it's pretty clear he had a lot of room to grow after this. I don't really think you're missing out on much by skipping it, which again, I'm fairly confident in saying you have, since the only way you can watch it is by finding an upload on some weird website, or by buying a DVD, which I don't know if these things are bootlegs or they were given an extremely minimal release, but either way, they are not super easily available. It's mildly amusing, but not worth jumping through all those hoops.
Thankfully, that's the only 4 out of 10 movie in here, and the only one that I don't like, for the most part, so we can skip right past 5 out of 10 and go into 6.
I see dead people.
You ever have one of those movies that you find yourself really enjoying, but then the ending blows, so it kinda taints your view of the whole thing? Yeah, that's how I feel about Last Night in Soho. Now, let me be clear that I'm not really a fan of horror movies. Yes, I am a wuss. So I wasn't sure how I would feel about this one going in, especially since this is probably Edgar Wright's most divisive film. But I actually found myself really getting into it. The story is simple, but I enjoy me a good mystery, and I think the way it's presented is really unique. Having Ellie see these visions of the past via dream sequences where she's placed in the role of Sandy is super creative, and I really like how they start out super fun and engaging, but get more and more disturbing and unsettling as they go on. I think they could have used a little more build-up, but still, it works well enough. Plus, it is crazy impressive how well they matched up Ellie being Sandy's reflections of any mirror you see. This movie is amazing on a technical level. The different shots they use are super cool, and some of the imagery in here is freaky as hell, but it honestly works. I will say the characters aren't written very well, but the actors all do a pretty good job. It's also interesting that this was Wright's first and currently only film to feature a female protagonist, and apparently she's based on his mother, which I think is kinda sweet. She's unfortunately a little generic, but the actress does enough to make it so you do care about her. Anya Taylor-Joy unsurprisingly kills it as Sandy, giving her both a fiery personality and conveying the trauma she's clearly going through. Even John is a fairly decent guy, so he provides a nice emotional center for Ellie and all this insanity. And I really gotta give credit to Wright for trying something completely different. This movie feels totally distinct from the rest of his work, but it does have some of his usual touches. Mainly mainly during the early dream sequences, which have a ton of energy and personality put into them, which only helps to clash even more with the disturbing stuff. And the use of music is kind of similar to Baby Driver, and while nowhere near as effective as that, it does lead to some really cool moments.
Even as someone who doesn't normally like horror movies, I thought this movie was really engaging and effective. And then the last third happens.
Yeah, talk about a movie that just didn't know when to quit. Not only does it feel pretty stretched out, I thought the movie would be wrapping up when there was actually 40 minutes left, but my god, did they just make some weird-ass choices with the plot. About an hour in, Ellie has a vision of what appears to be Sandy getting murdered by her pimp and has a full-on breakdown. So, that's it. Mystery solved. Why are there 40 minutes left? Well, first she goes to the police and asks them to investigate, but they don't do anything, so it doesn't add much. Then she and John go digging through old newspapers, only for her to have a vision of ghostly men and almost stab one of her classmates, which is creepy, but I still don't see what we're building up to. She thinks this old guy that's been following her is the pimp who killed Sandy, only for him to get hit by a car, and it's revealed that he was actually some random guy we saw for 2 seconds, so he just dies for no reason. And then we get the big twist of the movie, which is extremely weak. It turns out the old lady Ellie is renting from is Sandy, and she was the one who murdered not only her pimp, but every single man who used and abused her. So all that other stuff was meant to build up to this, and I don't really think it needed to. A simple murder mystery would have been a bit more interesting to me at least, but believe me, it gets much worse. Because Sandy ends up poisoning Ellie to keep her quiet, and then John comes in, so she stabs him. The house catches on fire, and rather than trying to put it out, Sandy pushes Ellie back up the stairs where she has visions of the men that she killed. This is where the tonal whiplash goes all over the place, because first it's supposed to be scary, but then everything calms down and the ghosts say to kill Sandy, but Ellie refuses, and when Sandy sees the ghosts, we're supposed to feel sympathy for her because they deserved it? Okay, taking that aside, she literally just attempted to kill 2 innocent people in cold blood, and now we're supposed to feel bad for her when she stays behind in the burning room as Ellie gets John to safety? Genuinely, what the hell is happening right now?
Are we supposed to feel bad for Sandy or not? I mean, obviously she went through a lot of trauma, and I get killing the first guy, but the others we didn't really see enough for it to be fully justified, and again, she tried to kill both Ellie and John for no reason other than to cover her tracks, which takes away most, if not all sympathy I had for her, so her death really is not as emotional as they clearly want it to be.
But then they somehow survive this, and Ellie puts on a fashion show inspired by the 60s clothing she saw and has a positive vision of Sandy. Yeah, you really should not feel this positively towards someone who tried to poison you. I really don't know what was going on here. It sucks, because like I said, I honestly enjoyed the first 2/3 of this movie. I thought it was a very creepy and very solid film, but all this nonsense at the end, it just left me really confused. I don't know what they were going for, but I do not think it worked at all. So I would say I enjoyed this movie overall, but I highly doubt it's one I'm ever gonna go back to. It is the prime example of a movie that is so good until it's not.
But that's the only 6 out of 10 movie, so on to lucky number 7.
I'd spend a lot less time asking questions and more time running.
Edgar Wright's most recent picture, which was one of the biggest reasons I wanted to do this ranking, since I thought it would be a good way to end it off, as well as my first time seeing one of his films in theater, which was cool. And unfortunately, it's one of his more polarizing films. I don't know anyone who hates this movie, but I know a decent amount of people found it underwhelming, and I can kind of see why, but personally, I had a pretty fun time.
Now, I've never read the book that this movie was based on, nor have I seen the original movie with Arnold, so I can't really judge this as an adaptation or a remake, but as a standalone movie, I think it works well enough.
For starters, I absolutely love the premise. I think it's a really solid commentary on how big companies exploit vulnerable people for entertainment and profit. It's such a brilliant idea, and this does a pretty good job with it. This easily has the best production design of any Edgar Wright movie. The cities look absolutely incredible, and I love the style this movie has. The different ways everything is displayed, the technology it all has, even just the buildings, they all look so freaking cool. That is easily the strongest aspect of the film. If there's 2 things Edgar Wright can do really well, it's give great fast-paced comedy and shoot some really cool action scenes, and this movie does a really solid job at both of those. The chase scenes in this movie are really fun. You honestly do feel the tension of whenever Ben is in danger, and he could easily be caught and killed at any moment. But the different ways he escapes each scenario are super creative and so entertaining. Not to mention the editing is super slick, which is something you'll hear me saying about a lot of these movies, and it provides a great selection of laughs. Some of my favorites are when Ben sees the shows manipulating footage of him to make it seem like an asshole, so for the next tape he leans into it by saying some of the most absurd stuff you can imagine, like he eats puppies. When he leaves a tape for the people hunting him with a note that says, "Mail it yourself, assholes." I love how petty that is. And the ways the other 2 contestants get caught are hilariously pathetic. Plus, any scene with the network head is bound to get some great laughs. Josh Brolin absolutely kills it with this guy that's a perfect blend of hilarious and slimy. And Michael Cera gets some great laughs too.
But I will admit, this movie is a prime example of style over substance, which Edgar Wright is normally very good at, but it doesn't quite work as strongly here as as it does in most of his other movies.
Ben works well enough for what the movie is going for, being a desperate everyman, but I think they could have given him a bit more character development. We don't get a huge amount of build-up with Ben and his family before the game begins, and I think they could have done a bit more with that. Like have his kid's sickness become more dire after a couple of days rather than just one. That way they could have fleshed out his relationship with them a bit more. What we get is fine, it works, but it could have been improved. Same goes for Glenn Powell's performance. He does fine enough, but nowhere near as good as many of Edgar Wright's past leads. And the ending wasn't very good, which I guess is fitting given how this is a Stephen King adaptation. The climax felt pretty weak since the vast majority of it was condensed into just one location, and it feels like they're trying to cram in way too much stuff for it to really work. Like the reveal of one of the hunters being a past contestant has little to no impact because we know nothing about this guy. If this had been foreshadowed earlier or if he was a more prominent character, then it could have worked, but as is, it just feels pointless. And speaking of pointless, there is genuinely no reason for Amelia to be in the movie. She doesn't show up until the last third and basically contributes nothing to the plot, aside from trying to add some extra commentary, which just feels forced. Not to mention the whole act goes on for way too long. This isn't a super long movie, but I was pretty ready to start wrapping up. So yeah, The Running Man isn't a super amazing movie or anything, but I think some of the backlash it's gotten is a bit overblown. It's certainly one of Edgar Wright's weaker films, but when half of the movies you made are absolute bangers, that's not really an insult. This movie's still fun, and I wouldn't mind returning to it in the future, preferably a future that's less dystopian than this one, if only slightly.
It's the end of the world as we know it.
The World's End is by far the least discussed entry in Edgar Wright's Three Flavors Cornetto trilogy with Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, and it's not hard to see why, because in true trilogy fashion, the third entry is the weakest. Now, it's still a good movie, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't quite have the same oomph that the last two did.
And I think a large part of that is because of how long it takes to really get started.
The opening 30 minutes of the movie are played entirely straightforward about a guy named Gary trying to bring back his old friend group so they can complete a bar run that they attempted back in high school. And while there are plenty of jokes in here, the majority of it is taken very seriously. It's clear Gary is in a super rough spot with his life and is trying to recapture his youth, while the others have obviously moved on, especially Andy, who doesn't even drink anymore. Now, this isn't a bad setup. The characters are pretty likable despite their flaws, and I like how this time Simon Pegg is playing the more loser character rather than Nick Frost, so it adds a bit more variety to the trilogy. And it does work in a way of luring you into a false sense of security so that when the weird stuff happens, it feels a lot more shocking, but I feel like this is a little lacking for a couple of reasons. One is that I feel like this type of thing was done much better in Shaun of the Dead, since that was still really funny, and the other is that this movie isn't quite as stylized as its predecessors. Each movie in the trilogy falls into a different genre and style, a zombie film, an action cop movie, and an alien invasion. But this one doesn't go as all out with its style the way the other two did, which I find a little disappointing. I know it seems a bit unfair to say that, since the movies aren't technically part of a series, they just have some of the same people working on them, but I feel like my point still stands. This movie doesn't really stand out a whole lot, and I don't remember a huge amount of it.
If you saw my Muppet ranking, it's kind of similar to how I felt about Muppets Most Wanted, because while I do enjoy the movie, I really feel like I wanted more of it, because what we get is really solid.
When it's revealed what's actually going on with the whole alien invasion thing, it makes for a fantastic reveal, and from this point on, while the stakes are raised, the movie shines a lot more from a comedic standpoint. Most of the jokes in the first half were just showing how much of a loser Gary is, which could be funny, but it was also kind of repetitive. From this point on, though, we get a lot more variety, with my personal favorite being Pete letting himself die just to kill the copy of his childhood bully, and when they tell him it's not worth it, he just screams, "Yes, it is!" The pubs all looking identical is not only a great joke, but also a clever piece of foreshadowing, and Andy punching the girl in the stomach to get his wedding ring back was something I was so hyping for, and really happy to see. And that's not even getting into the action scenes in this movie. Apparently some of the stuff was choreographed by Jackie Chan's stunt team, so you know they weren't messing around. Now this is one of the biggest examples of me wishing the movie went a lot further in places, because there aren't that many of these action scenes, and my god, I would have loved to see more, because they are great. And I'm kind of mixed on the ending, since while the climax with Gary admitting to being a screw-up and Andy helping him strive to be better is really good, and the speech he gives the aliens is great, I think literally ending with the apocalypse was kind of weird. I mean, yeah, it's kind of in the title, but I personally wasn't a huge fan of that. Still, this movie is overall a good time. It's funny, creative, entertaining, and has some solid enough emotional moments to make it worth seeing. I just think they could have gone a lot further in some areas.
But now we're past the 7 out of 10 movie, so on to the glory of 8.
Perhaps the disease infects your clothing as well.
Infects my... Are you insinuating that my clothes are alive?
Here we go. Edgar Wright's first proper film, the beginning of what would be known as the Cornetto trilogy. Shaun of the Dead really surprised me in that it was much less of a comedy than I was expecting. I mean, the tagline is a romantic comedy with zombies, so I was expecting something similar in a vein to Zombieland, where the zombie outbreak is just a background element and the movie is mainly an excuse to tell jokes. But no, the movie actually takes itself pretty seriously, and I don't mean in the way of something like Airplane, where the movie is ridiculous but the actors play it completely straight. Shaun of the Dead uses the zombie element in a pretty serious way, at least in the second half. The first half is primarily a comedy. Hell, the zombies don't even show up until about 15 to 20 minutes in, and when they do, they're mostly played for comedic effect. But once Philip gets turned into a zombie, the movie shifts pretty hard in its tone. There are still some jokes, but nowhere near as many as the first half of the movie. It's kind of the opposite of The World's End in that regard.
This might sound like a complaint, but believe me, it's not. This movie's dramatic moments work just as well as the comedic ones.
And a large reason for that is the characters are all pretty likable. They have a great variety of personalities to them, and the actors all do a really solid job of making them interesting and funny. Shaun and Ed are a pretty fun duo that have some great banter, so you really do buy their friendship, David is pretty funny, and Liz is decent, though Diane is kind of forgettable, but she still works fine enough. But the tonal shift doesn't feel super jarring, it honestly feels like a solid evolution of the film. Like, the comedic moments draw you in so that the dramatic moments honestly do work. So the movie is able to be both a satire of zombie films as well as a traditional zombie film, and both work pretty well. I wouldn't say this is one of the funniest comedies I've ever seen, especially from Edgar Wright and even this trilogy, but there are some really good bits. Like Shaun having to decide which of his records they should throw to kill the zombies since he doesn't want to break all of them. Or the different plans on how they're gonna get Shaun's mum and Liz to safety. Or them beating a zombie with a pool cue and failing to kill it while Don't Stop Me Now plays in the background. All of this stuff is great. Hell, the dramatic moments can actually help the comedy because the high tension shows how incompetent they really are, which is a much more realistic and thus hilarious scenario than if they were just kicking the zombies' butts with no issue. Plus, I absolutely love the editing in this movie. You can easily tell this is when Wright was starting to find his style, especially in this aspect, because it is just so flashy and unique that it really helps the movie stand out.
But like I said earlier, when this movie decides that it wants to be serious, it legit does a really good job at it.
The talk Philip has with Shaun right before he dies is honestly pretty sad. When you find out Barbara was bitten, it's legit concerning, and the ensuing scuffle the group has is intense. David's death is absolutely brutal, and when the zombies all start rushing the bar, things just get nuts. Ed getting bitten, the place being set on fire, Shaun and Liz contemplating shooting themselves. I was not expecting scenes this dramatic to come from a comedy film, but I'm not gonna complain because, again, they actually work, and you really do feel a sense of release when the army shows up and saves them. Of course, all this just makes the ending even funnier when we see they found a way to control zombies, so they force them to work retail jobs and compete in morally questionable game shows. Plus, Shaun having Ed chained up in the shed is just priceless. All in all, I had a pretty good time with Shaun of the Dead. It's not one of my all-time favorites, but it's pretty clear this is where Edgar Wright truly got his start, and things would only continue to go up from here.
As evident by the fact that that is the only 8 out of 10 movie. So, now it's time for the 9s.
You don't need a license to drive a sandwich.
Oh my god, Baby Driver is freaking awesome. This is genuinely one of the sickest movies I have ever seen.
Have you ever watched a Fast and the Furious movie and thought to yourself, I mean, this is fun, but I really wish it had a story that was worth getting invested in? Well, to that I say, why the hell are you watching a Fast and Furious movie? That's clearly not what they're going for. But also, Baby Driver is pretty much that.
The car chase scenes in this movie are crazy elaborate. I can't imagine how much planning went into a lot of the stuff because it is super impressive. Everything from the stunts themselves to the way they're shot and edited make for some of the most gripping action scenes I've seen in a long time. I'm genuinely shocked at how they managed to pull some of these things off. If you need proof that award shows need to recognize stunt performers more, well then here you go, because this movie is some of the best I've ever seen. Although, interesting side note, this is the only movie Edgar Wright has directed that's been nominated for any Oscars at all. I think it's a crime that his stuff hasn't been recognized, but at least this movie managed to get a few technical nominations, all 3 of which it lost to Dunkirk, another reason for me to hate that movie. But again, this movie isn't just about the action, it actually does have a pretty gripping story behind it. Baby is a legit interesting and likable character. He's a great example of a fairly normal guy thrown into a crazy scenario, so he's really easy to sympathize with. Despite him constantly working for criminals, you can tell he doesn't enjoy doing this stuff and is simply trying to get by, which is very evident by both his constant distractions with his music and how he tries to make sure innocent people don't get hurt. Like when he tries to warn the lady at the post office. It's simple, but it does a great job in humanizing him. Plus his chemistry with Debbie is pretty solid, so you honestly care about her too. I'll admit she could have been written a little more complex, but thankfully she works well enough with the type of character she's supposed to be. Doc is a pretty menacing villain, though part of that is because of the unfortunate casting choice, and the side characters are hilarious. My favorite is easily Bats. Jamie Foxx just absolutely nails it from a comedic and serious perspective. Yeah, this movie is also really freaking funny too. I feel like that should be a given for every Edgar Wright movie at this point.
But now it is time to get into the absolute best thing about this movie, the music.
This movie has a fantastic soundtrack, just an amazing collage of some absolutely classic songs, but that's not what makes it so great. What makes it so great is the way they implement the songs into the characters and the surrounding area. Baby is constantly listening to music as a way of not only dulling a ringing in his ear from a car accident when he was young, but also as a form of escapism, as I hinted to earlier. Given his rather dire living situation, he uses music as a way of giving new energy to what's around him and connecting with the people he cares about. A large part of what brings him close to Debbie and his foster father Joe is through music, and he has a big collection of cassette tapes and iPods with a giant selection of songs in them. Hell, he even remixes things people have said into songs as another way of understanding the world around him. The main theme of his connection to music is a really great way of helping us understand his character, and the different songs that play give a perfect insight into what he's going through at that moment. But while this is great on a character level, it's even better on a technical level. I wasn't kidding when I said they incorporate each of the songs into the surrounding area, because so much of the beat and lyrics are utilized in what you're seeing. From what other people are saying, to what's moving around you, to just little details in the background, it's almost like the songs are a metronome for the movie, which makes for some fantastic sequences that are super captivating to watch. Especially since many of them are done in a single take. I think this is genuinely the best use of licensed music I have ever seen in a film. There's only a few minor issues with this movie. One is, of course, Kevin Spacey being here, but the other is some weird choices for the climax. I think Doc deciding to help Baby get away feels extremely rushed since this guy has been almost nothing but a danger to him the entire time. I guess he had a soft spot for Baby, but still, it could have used a lot more build-up if they were gonna do it. And the standoff with Buddy feels kinda underwhelming. In a movie with all kinds of crazy car chases, the final showdown being a glorified cat and mouse game in a parking lot feels like a missed opportunity. But at the end, end of the day, I don't really care because Baby Driver is awesome. I've been meaning to watch this movie for a while, and it really did not disappoint. This is actually the highest grossing film Edgar Wright has ever made, and I say it deserves that title because it is easily one of his best.
Oh, I know! Scott.
I freaking love Scott Pilgrim. Ever since I first saw this movie when I was 16, it has been one of my favorite movies of all time, and it genuinely gets better every single time I watch it.
Honestly, a big part of the reason I wanted to do this ranking was as an excuse to finally watch this movie again, not only because I hadn't seen it in a while, but also because since my last viewing, I actually read the graphic novels that it was based on and watched the Netflix series that came out a couple years ago, which is also great, by the way.
Now, the idea of trying to take 6 graphic novels and combining them into one sounds like a bad idea, especially since the last book wasn't actually out at the time of production, but this movie really works because it's less of an adaptation and more of a reimagining. Rather than copying the books verbatim, it takes the general plot points of them and puts its own spin on it. So instead of being a one-to-one adaptation, it's more so following bullet points, which not only make it work much better in movie form, but it also makes it a more unique experience. So there's plenty of value in here for people who have read the books and people who haven't. But enough about how it's adapted from the source material. What makes this movie so great on its own? Well, for starters, it's one of the most stylized movies I've ever seen. The books were already structured much like a video game, and this movie takes full advantage of that. I think Edgar Wright is one of the only directors who could pull something like this off. He is a master of visual gags, and this movie is easily his best use of them. The amount of little things that pop up is frankly absurd, from something as obvious as giant music sound waves when the characters play their instruments, to something as subtle as a pee bar showing up when Scott takes a piss. The comic-esque onomatopoeias are super charming, the little stats they give each character are hilarious, the animated sequences that look like they're ripped right from the graphic novels are gorgeous, and the editing is totally on point.
This movie is completely oozing with style, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have any substance to it.
The story is both laughably simple and stupidly complex at the same time, largely due to, again, the whole thing being structured like a video game. Scout Pilgrim wants to be with Ramona Flowers, which is completely understandable. I mean, just look at her, but he has to defeat her 7 evil ex-boyfriends.
Exes.
Right, in order to do so. But it's not just about fighting people in order to get with her. Scott really does have to grow as a person. I mean, the movie literally starts out with him dating a high schooler despite being 22 because he's clearly reeling from a bad breakup. So the exes aren't just a physical test he has to overcome, they also serve as a good metaphor of the dangers he has to face when pursuing a new relationship, since he could just as easily get his heart broken. But they also serve as a good reminder of Ramona's past and all the people she's hurt. So while she wants to leave it all behind her, the impact she's left on the exes still affects them personally, some more severely than others. One of the funniest things about this movie is the fact that pretty much every character is an asshole, with a few exceptions like Knives and young Neil, which could very easily be obnoxious, but it works because the actors do such a great job and the writing is absolutely phenomenal. This movie is comedic gold. There are so many gags that still make me laugh hard. Scott is a freaking tool, but the other characters like Stacy, Kim, and especially Julie are always there to call him out on it, which I think balances it out. Ramona has clearly hurt a lot of people in the past, but she does feel at least some sort of guilt for it. Steven's desperation to get the band going, despite them not actually being that good, is hilarious. Knives, like I said, is genuinely likable, and you do feel bad for her with how much Scott pulls her around, and also, funny fact, Ellen Wong is actually older than Michael Cera. Yeah, she was 25 years old when this movie came out. The 7 evil exes all have some pretty good bits, mostly, with Todd being my personal favorite, though Lucas is a close second. But of course, I'd be hard-pressed to not mention who is easily the best character in the movie, Wallace. This guy is absolutely hilarious. So many of the best bits in the movie come from him, like him flirting with Stacy's boyfriend who doesn't seem to reciprocate, only to cut to them making out, and the implication that he's done this more than once, telling Ramona to kick Roxy in the balls, and easily his best moment, the argument with Crash and the boys. That whole exchange is priceless. Yeah, I already said this movie is hilarious, and I'm not done. There's the iconic bread makes you fat line, the how are you doing that thing with your mouth scene, Scott throwing the package in the trash can, which apparently took 30 takes, the entire vegan police scene skimming over the email, Stacy's utter confusion at the fight with Matthew, but nothing compares to what is easily the funniest scene in the movie, Scott diving through the window to avoid Knives. This is already a hilarious visual, but it works on so many different levels. Him being seen as the door opens and running off, Wallace slightly closing it to help him hide, the fact that you can see him dive through the window, Wallace saying he just left without even reacting to what happened behind him, Knives believing him when he says this, Scott coming back to grab his coat, and then him running down the street behind her.
I don't care how many times I have seen this movie, that scene still makes me die of laughter every single time.
But I've somehow gone this entire segment without discussing the coolest part of the movie, the fight scenes. Once again, this whole thing is structured like a video game, with each of the exes being a boss fight. Not only is the style displayed at full force here, and the visual of Michael Cera kicking ass despite being skinnier than me is hilarious, but I really love how each ex has a different style to their fight, and a different method of taking them down. Matthew is just a straightforward fight. Lucas, he has to fight his stunt doubles, who are Chris Evans' actual stunt doubles in real life and then trick him into doing a risky trick. Todd, he has a base battle and then tricks him into drinking half and half, which makes him lose his psychic vegan powers. Roxy mostly fights Ramona until Scott delivers a single blow in a way that's admittedly kind of weird. This part makes a bit more sense in the books. The twins are a part of a band duel, and then finally Gideon, who requires the use of a sword, and even then he takes 2 tries to beat. All of these fight scenes are freaking awesome, and the X's turning into coins when they're defeated is so simple yet super cool. Especially when he fights off the goons at the end and there's just a pile of coins in the shape of bodies. I also find it amusing that the movie is unintentionally one giant comic book actor crossover. Michael Cera voiced Robin in the Lego Batman movie, Mary Elizabeth Winstead played Huntress in Birds of Prey, Chris Evans played both the Human Torch in Fantastic Four and Captain America in the MCU, Brie Larson played Captain Marvel in the MCU, Brandon Routh played Superman in Superman Returns, Thomas Jane played the Punisher in The Punisher, and Jason Schwartzman voiced the Spot in Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, and I find that too amusing to not bring up.
As much as I love this movie though, there is still one issue, and it's that some areas definitely feel underdeveloped.
Again, it's impressive they were able to adapt 6 books into one movie so well, but obviously corners had to be cut somewhere, which is even more prevalent if you have read the books. And I don't just mean some side characters like Lisa and Knives' father being removed. Ones that are in here, like Steven, Envy, and Kim, feel kinda sidelined. The X is all very wildly, since while Lucas, Todd, and Gideon get some pretty prominent moments, Matthew and Roxy don't do a whole lot, and the twins do almost nothing. They're only in one scene, and they don't even get any lines. There's a reason they were the only actors to not come back for Scott Pilgrim Takes Off. And even then, there's some pretty prominent stuff that doesn't get any focus, like the line about Scott having to fight a bunch of dudes to save Kim was an entire subplot in the books, and the whole thing about Ramona being able to travel through Scott's head, that's one of the main plot points of the graphic novels, but here it's only seen twice and only mentioned in dialogue once. But that's a pretty minor issue in the long run. I absolutely love Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. It might not be high art or anything, but it is an absolute blast of a movie that I am almost always down to rewatch. It may have been a flop when it came out, but it's gained a huge cult following over 8 years, and it is not hard to see why.
But despite it being one of my favorite movies ever, it still has 1 or 2 little things that prevent me from giving it a perfect 10. Which is something I cannot say about the last movie on this list. So, going into this ranking, Scott Pilgrim was actually the only Edgar Wright movie that I had actually seen, but even then, it was already one of my all-time favorites, so I had a pretty strong feeling that there was only one film that even had a chance of topping it. A nice, tiny, wholesome, ordinary film known simply as Hot Fuzz.
Well, Scott Pilgrim is probably the biggest following of any Edgar Wright film due to it being based on a graphic novel series, and Baby Driver is the most commercially successful film. Hot Fuzz is probably Edgar Wright's most acclaimed film, and as someone who had never seen it before, I gotta be honest with you, this movie doesn't get enough praise. Yeah, I mean it, this movie is near universally beloved, and I don't think that's enough, because this might actually be one of the best movies I've ever seen in my entire life. Much like the rest of the Cornetto trilogy, it takes itself pretty seriously, despite being a comedy, but the difference is that this is an action cop movie as opposed to a zombie movie or a sci-fi film. The style itself is a lot more exaggerated and over the top, so I think it lends itself to being a comedy much better, since the more seriously it takes itself, the funnier it ends up being. The film follows a super dramatic and immaculate cop who's sent from London to a small town in the middle of nowhere, which is usually seen as a demotion for cops, since a lot more crime happens in big cities than small towns. Hell, this one is so small that no crime actually happens at all, or so the people think, because when people actually do start being murdered, it's all written off as just an accident. So while everyone thinks there's nothing to worry about, Nick goes all in trying to find out who the killer is. Seeing Nick react to the constant insanity of everyone around him is absolutely hilarious. His anger growing larger and larger to the point where he just snaps is some of the funniest stuff I have ever seen in a movie. Simon Pegg gives a top-tier performance of a super dramatic cop thrown into a ridiculous scenario, and he delivers every line perfectly. But you can't have a buddy cop movie without a buddy, and Nick Frost does a perfect job as Danny. He plays the bumbling oaf character really well because he never comes across as annoying. The writing for him is top-notch, and his performance makes him really likable. The two have great chemistry together, probably the best of the trilogy, since they have no prior history together, yet you really do see their friendship grow over the course of the film. And that's not even getting into the side characters. All of these people are hilarious in their own way. They are exaggerated, sure, but they still resemble realistic small-town people just enough so that you do believe they would act this way, which just makes their reactions to everything around them even funnier. I think the main thing that makes this Edgar Wright's best film is that it takes just about every great aspect of his movies and does them to a T. Super fast-paced energy, wonderfully stylized editing, awesome action sequences, and absolutely hilarious writing and visual gags. I'm not joking when I say this might be the absolute funniest movie I have ever seen in my entire life. There were so many scenes that had me absolutely howling with laughter. The entire pub being composed of underage kids, the different ways each of the characters die, the justifications they come up with of how they're somehow accidents, Danny constantly telling Nick he is the one leaving nasty things in his locker, the two of them watching other buddy cop movies, the straightforward response of sane person when referring to Lurch's family, and easily the funniest part of the movie, the swan. I won't dare spoil what actually happens, but if you see the movie, you know why it's absolute perfection.
I think part of what makes this movie so strong is that while the reality is heightened, it never fully goes over overboard with it.
The style is very in your face, but never to a point where it feels super unrealistic. Just about everything that happens in this movie could possibly happen in real life. The movie sets up a pretty obvious red herring, and when it's finally revealed what's actually going on, it sounds nuts, but it honestly kind of makes sense. In a weird small village like this, I could genuinely see something like this happening. You really do want to see where everything is gonna go, and you find yourself getting invested in the characters. And all of this builds up to one of the most insane movie climaxes I have ever seen. The final shootout in this movie is simultaneously one of the most awesome action scenes in film and one of the funniest things I have ever witnessed in my life. I was just as invested in the stakes and tension as I was laughing my ass off at some of the hilarious ways each of the characters die, and even some of the ways they don't die. Plus, the callbacks in this movie are phenomenal. Just about every scene or gag ends up having some relevance later on, either in a serious way, a comedic way, or both. Some of the stuff in here is just ingenious, and I cannot compliment it enough. I guess if I had to nitpick, there is a small part of me that thinks this movie could have been a little shorter, but there's another part of me that thinks it's sacrilege to say that about a movie this entertaining and hilarious. I had an amazing time with Hot Fuzz. This is genuinely one of my new favorite movies. I am so glad I finally got a chance to check it out, and I urge you to do so as well. If you have seen it, give it a rewatch, because I guarantee you'll pick up some stuff you missed previously, and if you haven't seen it, you are missing out on what is easily one of the most wonderful things to ever grace the land of cinema, and easily the best movie to come from the filmography of Edgar Wright.
There you have it. That's all 8 of Edgar Wright's movies, and once again, he is easily one of my new favorite directors, because watching through all of these was a total blast.
Admittedly, it is a little disappointing that his 2 most recent films were some of the weaker ones, but as far as movies go, they aren't bad. So I'm still looking forward to anything else this guy cooks up, because he's made some absolute banger movies that I am so glad I finally got to watch, and I highly encourage you to check out if you haven't, because the vast majority of them are hilarious, creative, and above all else, fun. And sometimes there's nothing in life more valuable than fun. Hell, you might even find more value in some of them than I do, except for maybe a Fistful of Fingers, since that's really more of a novelty, and I don't think you can actually watch it legally, but whatever. At the very least, Scott Pilgrim, Baby Driver, and Hot Fuzz are mandatory viewing. Okay, the Horkonella trilogy really, but especially that one. Please go watch these movies, because you will not regret it. I had a really good time doing this ranking, and I would love to check out more director filmographies in the future, but until then, thank you all for watching, and don't let the door hit you on the way out.